like. So as I see it, and as we look at any DDoS solution, how we expect a DDoS solution to work is that first, it should be able to scale very effectively. It is so it should scale seamlessly to any number of requests that is coming in. This is this is required because you need to first observe the request that is coming in. The solution should observe the request without it going down. If not, what would eventually mean that the solution goes down, so all the traffic inline is dropped, which means the attacker has succeeded, right? So the first step that has to be done is you have to observe the request, the architecture has to scale. Then once it is observed, then analysis has to be done. And in these cases, in the case of DDoS attacks, looking at one request in isolation will not provide you any attack patterns, right? It could be a legitimate request to an origin, to an JPEG, to a home page, to a login page. So right, so these things in isolation does not look like an attack. But all of a sudden, you are seeing multiple requests for these resources, and and collectively looking at the behavior of the resource, behavior of the users, you have to decide whether it is an attack or a legitimate pattern, and then allow it. Right. So this is how a typical DDoS solution should work. It should scale first, observe the request, analyze it, and then allow only legitimate requests to the origin. So one, it should scale first, scale seamlessly. So that has to be taken care of, and it is paramount. The DDoS protection should be in line so that it can look at all the requests in real time and take corrective actions. It should not be an on-off kind of a situation where when there is some kind of a DDoS observed, then you switch it on to do corrective actions, right? So then it is either too late or it is not ineffective, and or you end up adding latencies when such things happen. Then the next part is about how do you analyze, right? And as I talked about in the last slide, you cannot just rely on generic rate limits, right? You need to be able to understand the behavior of request that is coming in, and based on the behavior of the request, determine whether a DDoS is happening and then block it, right? So what I mean by that is understand the behavior of how the users are typically accessing the site. What is the typical baseline looks like? Do they generally make 10 requests a minute, 20 requests a minute, whatever it is, right? And the protection should be around the behavior of the site, and it should be more granular. It cannot be very generic in nature. You have to be at a granular level. So typically, there would be only few requests to a login page, about 2 to 3 requests from a user, but to an home page that could be 20 requests or 100 requests, depending on how the application is working. And whereas to a checkout page, again, it will be lower. So there should be different granularity controls that should be available to configure and protect these critical resources granularly, so that there is so that the protection works effectively. Finally, there is a need to take customers' interest in mind when the solutions are built. One, it should be unmetered. At least they should not be penalized for attackers attacking them. So legitimate blocks should not be charged, and there should be support to the customers, where when there are sophisticated attacks happening and the out-of-box policies are not working, the security vendors should act as an experts and provide advices and customized policies to thwart these attacks. And there should be a mechanism to get through these things, right? So that's eventually how a solution should be built to block the kind of DDoS attacks that we are seeing in the current age. So with that scenario set on how we think a solution would work, Let me now jump into how Aptrana goes about providing a solution for such kind of a DDoS attack. So I'm going to give you a quick demo about how we provide our DDoS solution. This is our client portal. I'm not going to go into the details of the portal, but this is how the entire portal works. And in this case, I'm talking about an so this is a portal, and this is one of the sites that is protected by AppTrana. What Before I go into the details, this is like the trends of the DDoS attacks and how the DDoS attacks are happening. But before I go into it, what I'll talk about is how we do go about providing a DDoS protection, right? And DDoS protection is we are calling it behavioral based DDoS protection, and the reason why we call it is we don't ask customers to give a static rate limits, right? Instead of that, we tell the customers the behavior of the site. We tell them how the typical behavior for your application looks like. So, for example, here we are saying that, hey, this is the trend that we are seeing. The maximum number of requests that we are seeing from an IP in the last 7 days is about 15 requests a minute. This is across the entire application. And for the customer, he can now go and look at the trends, and then based on his risk appetite, that is essentially what is the capacity until which he wants to allow beyond the typical behavior, he can configure the policies. So he could say, instead of 100 requests a minute, he could say, okay, at 15 requests is the typical max. Okay, let me configure it at 200%, right? So at 200% of max, he will start take you are configuring a policy that, okay, now start taking corrective actions. The corrective actions could be block, it could be just notify me, or it could be show captures, right? So there are various corrective options available, and what is the duration for these? All those things can be configured. So the advantage here is that now, instead of asking you a static rate limit, saying that, hey, what should be my rate limit, and you providing a static value, you're giving a policy, or you're configuring a policy based on your risk appetite and the behavior. So now, as the behavior of the site gradually changes, so because of the change in application, or because your business is improving, or you're suddenly doing some kind of marketing campaigns, there are a lot more requests coming to your application. Now, so today my max is 15. Tomorrow, as it gradually increases and 20, it is still below my 30 max, right? So I would have allowed these requests. But my next day's max is actually 40 instead of 30. And as it gradually increases, it will gradually, as the traffic gradually adjusts, these policies will automatically fine tuning it based on the behavior of the site, eventually making that we adjust to the behaviors of your application, right? And providing a more granular protection instead of giving a very high rate limits, and then getting and allowing legitimate attacks to get to. Right. So this is how our behavioral based DDoS policy works. We have three sets of policies that we give by default. One we call as the host based policy, which is just looking at the total number of requests that is coming to the host, and then telling them and allowing you to set policies around that. Then we have it at an granular levels, at an IP level, how many requests are coming, and then at a session level, how many requests are coming, right? And again, in all these cases, it is a behavioral based, where we tell you the behavior of the site, and then we create policies around the behavior of the site instead of asking for a static rate limits. Not only that, we also provide granular controls at an IP level, at the IP URL level, at a session level, which eventually means that for critical assets like a login page, or like a checkout page, you could configure more granular protections. So you might be getting about 100 requests a minute for your entire application, but from an IP. But for an login page, you might not get more than 3 requests a minute or 5 requests a minute. So you can provide a granular control, and again, this is a behavior based. So you can look at the behavior of what is the typical user behaving like in the last 7 days trends, and based on your risk appetite, configure the policies. So this will provide you a more granular control at a URI level instead of providing a very generic controls, which is something which is again, this is something unique to us, right? And then when the policies trigger, you get to analyze all the attacks, what is happening, and where the attack is coming from, and all those things. So this is how a behavioral DDoS protection looks at a glance, right? So we have certain system-defined policies, which is automatically configured when an application is onboarded, and it gets adjusted based on the behavior of your sites as we learn from the traffic. And more, there are granular controls that is provided to the customers to create granular policies also. So you could create policies at a URI level, and also at a session level, and also at a geo level, right? So this is how we are continuously enhancing our protection. And the best part about it is it is not just configure and leave it, right? So when it comes to, say, the host-based policies, the host-based policies is designed such that when there's a sudden increase in the number of requests that is coming to your application, then you are notified, and our managed service team is also notified. This is done because no matter how granular controls you put in, there can always be sophisticated attacks like the one I explained for the when I talked about the typical use case or the characteristics. There could be sophisticated attacks that is coming in, which could go still under the radar even if you have configured granular based policies and behavior based policies. So in such cases, there is a notification that comes in, and then based on the notification, our team analyzes the request, and then they send a quick update to the customers, telling them, hey, this is a typical trend that we are seeing. We are seeing a sudden increase in requests, but the analysis is that this is coming from these IPs, these URIs, these user agents, and the likes. And then we give recommendations around how this can be blocked by the combination of these patterns, which when applied will quickly block any sophisticated attack. So what would have taken days or even the application going down, this in these cases it would be immediately notified, and then our managed service kicks in, and a proper analysis is provided on request, and recommendations is also provided, which eventually means that we don't let customers suffer in the dark, right? Instead of that, we give you the analysis, we give you the recommendations, which eventually would help you protect against any kind of sophisticated DDoS attacks. And we are constantly building on our protection solutions, and we are looking at ways to automate these recommendations uh, and providing auto corrections around such sophisticated attacks, also using our machine learning models. This is something that works, and which should be again available very soon. With